What happens when America's country music queen comes face to face with late-night television's golden boy, and a simple interview turns into the most explosive television moment of the year? Tonight, we're diving deep into the shocking confrontation that had millions of viewers glued to their screens and left the entire entertainment industry buzzing. Before we get started, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling me what you think really caused this heated exchange. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss a single word of what went down. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon was supposed to be just another routine promotional appearance. Reba McEntire, the undisputed queen of country music, was there to talk about her latest album, her upcoming tour dates, and maybe share a few laughs with America's favorite late-night host. The audience was packed with fans. The cameras were rolling, and everything seemed perfectly normal, as Jimmy introduced his guest with his trademark enthusiasm. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the incredible, the legendary Reba McEntire." Jimmy's voice boomed across Studio 6B as the familiar theme music played, and Reba walked out, waving to the cheering crowd. She looked stunning in a flowing burgundy dress, her signature red hair perfectly styled, every inch the seasoned performer who had conquered both country music and Broadway stages. "Reba, welcome back to the show." Jimmy stood up from behind his desk, arms outstretched for the customary hug. "You look absolutely fantastic. How are you feeling?" "I'm doing wonderful, Jimmy. Thank you so much for having me back," Reba replied, her famous smile lighting up the stage as she settled into the guest chair. "It's always such a pleasure to be here." "Well, we are thrilled to have you. I have to say, your new album is incredible. I've been listening to it non-stop. The vocals, the storytelling, everything about it is just pure magic." Jimmy picked up a copy of the album from his desk, holding it up for the cameras. "Tell us about the inspiration behind this collection of songs." Reba leaned forward slightly, her eyes brightening as she began to speak. "Well, you know, Jimmy, this album is really about authentic storytelling. It's about real experiences, real emotions, and connecting with people through honest music. In today's world, I think we've lost some of that authenticity, especially in the entertainment industry." "Absolutely, I couldn't agree more," Jimmy nodded enthusiastically. "And speaking of authenticity, I have to ask about something that's been all over social media lately. There's been some talk about country music artists and their political views, and how that affects their music and their fan base. What are your thoughts on that?" The question seemed innocent enough, but something shifted in Reba's expression. Her smile became slightly more reserved, and she took a moment before responding. "Jimmy, I've always believed that music should bring people together, not divide them. My job is to entertain, to tell stories that resonate with people regardless of their personal beliefs or political affiliations." Right, absolutely," Jimmy said, but then he continued down what would prove to be a dangerous path. "But don't you think artists have a responsibility to speak out on important issues? I mean, you have such a massive platform, such influence. Shouldn't you use that to make a difference?" Reba's posture straightened slightly, and her voice took on a more measured tone. "Jimmy, I've been in this business for over 40 years. I've learned that when you start telling people how to think or how to vote, you're not respecting their intelligence or their right to make their own decisions. My fans are smart people who don't need me to tell them what to believe. But surely there are some issues that are just right and wrong. Black and white," Jimmy pressed, his casual demeanor masking what was becoming an increasingly pointed line of questioning. "Climate change, social justice, equality, these aren't really political issues. They're human issues, don't you think?" The audience was starting to sense the tension building. Reba's famous warmth was being replaced by something cooler, more guarded. "Jimmy, with respect, I think you're oversimplifying some very complex issues. Life isn't as black and white as Hollywood likes to pretend it is. There are good people on all sides of these debates, and they deserve to have their voices heard and their perspectives respected." "Well, I mean, sure, but when we're talking about basic human rights," Jimmy continued, seemingly oblivious to the storm clouds gathering, "don't you think there's a moral obligation to stand up for what's right? Your fans look up to you, they trust you. And that's exactly why I'm careful about what I say. Reba replied, her voice becoming more firm. Because I respect them enough not to abuse that trust by pushing my personal agenda on them. They come to my concerts to escape from all the noise and division for a few hours, to feel connected to something beautiful and meaningful. That's what music is supposed to do. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, and for a moment it seemed like he might change direction. But then he made the comment that would ignite the firestorm. I just find it interesting that someone with your platform chooses to stay neutral on issues that affect so many people. Some might say that's a privilege that not everyone can afford. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and the audience seemed to collectively hold its breath. Reba's eyes flashed with something that anyone who knew her would recognize as a warning sign. Her grandmother's steel backbone, the same strength that had carried her through decades in the male-dominated music industry, was beginning to show. "Jimmy," she said slowly, her voice deadly calm, "I need you to stop right there." "I'm sorry." "I don't understand," Jimmy replied, but his smile was starting to look forced. "I'm just asking questions that I think our audience is curious about." "No, you're not asking questions," Reba said, her famous composure beginning to crack. "You're making accusations. You're suggesting that because I don't broadcast my every political opinion, I'm somehow failing my fans or shirking some responsibility. And frankly, I find that not only presumptuous, but incredibly insulting." The studio audience was dead silent now. This was not the light-hearted banter they had come to see. This was something else entirely. Something raw and uncomfortable and completely unprecedented for both of these beloved entertainers. "Reba, I think you're misunderstanding what I'm saying." Jimmy tried to backtrack, but the damage was already done. "I have nothing but respect for you and your career. I'm just saying that in times like these, silence can sometimes be interpreted as what?" Reba cut him off, her voice rising for the first time. "As cowardice? As complicity? Jimmy, let me tell you something about silence. Sometimes silence is wisdom. Sometimes silence is respect for other people's right to think for themselves. And sometimes silence is knowing when to keep your mouth shut instead of lecturing. People you don't even know about subjects you clearly don't understand." The tension in Studio 6B was now thick enough to cut with a knife. Jimmy's famous quick wit seemed to have abandoned him completely as he struggled to regain control of what was rapidly becoming a public relations nightmare for both of them. But Reba wasn't finished. "You want to talk about privilege, Jimmy?" Reba's voice was gaining strength now, the kind of power that had commanded stages from the Grand Ole Opry to Broadway. "Let me tell you about privilege. Privilege is sitting behind that desk in your $1 million studio, in your designer suits, surrounded by writers and producers who tell you exactly what to say and how to say it, and then having the audacity to lecture a woman who has worked her tail off for 4 decades about moral responsibility." Jimmy's face was starting to flush red. The audience could sense that this was spiraling completely out of control, but they were riveted, unable to look away from this collision between two entertainment titans. "Reba, I think you're taking this way too personally. I'm not attacking you, You're just what?" Reba interrupted, her Oklahoma accent becoming more pronounced as her anger grew. "You're just doing your job? You're just asking the tough questions? Jimmy, let me ask you something. When was the last time you had a real conversation with someone who disagrees with you politically? When was the last time you sat down with a farmer in Iowa, or a factory worker in Michigan, or a single mother in Alabama, and actually listened to what they have to say instead of telling them what they should think? I talk to people from all walks of life," Jimmy protested weakly, but even he seemed to realize how hollow that sounded. "My show represents everyone. We welcome all viewpoints." Reba let out a laugh that had no humor in it whatsoever. "Your show welcomes all viewpoints? Jimmy, your show is a liberal echo chamber masquerading as mainstream entertainment. You and your writers sit around making jokes about half the country, and then you act surprised when those people feel alienated and disconnected from the entertainment industry. You want to know why there's such division in this country? Look in the mirror." The cameras were still rolling, capturing every moment of this unprecedented meltdown. Jimmy's producers were probably scrambling in the control room, but there was no way to stop this train wreck now. It was live television at its most raw and unpredictable. That's completely unfair, Jimmy shot back, his famous nice guy persona finally cracking under the pressure. We make fun of everyone equally. We're comedians. That's what we do. And frankly, I think you're being a little hypersensitive here. The word hypersensitive was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Reba's eyes blazed with a fury that made it clear Jimmy had just made the worst mistake of his television career. Hypersensitive? She repeated, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Did you just call me hypersensitive for standing up for my fans and my values? I didn't mean it like that, Jimmy stammered, but it was too late. I just think maybe you're overreacting to what was meant to be a friendly conversation about important issues. Friendly conversation? Reba stood up from her chair, her full height making her an imposing figure even next to Jimmy's desk. Jimmy, there was nothing friendly about what you just did. You invited me on your show under the pretense of promoting my music, and then you ambushed me with a political interrogation designed to make me look bad if I don't give you the answers you want to hear. Nobody ambushed you, Jimmy said, his voice rising to match hers. These are legitimate questions that your fans deserve answers to. If you can't handle a few tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. The audience gasped audibly at that comment. Jimmy had just crossed a line that no interviewer should ever cross with a guest, especially not one of Reba McEntire's stature and experience. But Reba didn't explode the way everyone expected. Instead, she went completely still, her expression becoming ice cold. If I can't handle tough questions, she repeated slowly, her voice now carrying the full weight of her decades in the entertainment industry. Jimmy, I've been handling tough questions since before you were old enough to stay up late enough to watch television. I've been grilled by reporters about everything from my divorce to my business decisions to my parenting choices. I've faced down music industry executives who told me I was too old, too country, too independent. I've performed through personal tragedies that would have broken lesser people. So don't you dare suggest that I can't handle tough questions. Then answer them, Jimmy challenged, apparently not realizing he was digging his own grave deeper with every word. If you're so tough, if you're so experienced, then stop deflecting and give your fans some straight answers about where you stand on the issues that matter. The issues that matter to who? Reba demanded. To you? To your writers? To the people in your Manhattan bubble who think they know what's best for everyone else? Jimmy, my fans care about their families, their jobs, their communities. They care about music that speaks to their hearts and their experiences. They don't need me to validate their political beliefs or tell them how to vote, because they're intelligent adults who can think for themselves. But surely you have opinions, Jimmy pressed on, apparently unable to recognize that he was in a fight he could not win. Surely you care about the future of this country, about the planet, about social justice. How can you just stand on the sidelines and pretend none of it matters? I never said none of it matters, Reba replied, her patience finally reaching its breaking point. What I said is that it's not my job to be your political puppet. It's not my job to parrot whatever talking points are popular in Hollywood this week. My job is to make music that moves people, that helps them feel less alone in this world. And if you can't understand the value in that, then you have no business interviewing artists. Jimmy was clearly losing control of the situation, but instead of backing down gracefully, he doubled down on his mistakes. I think you're being deliberately obtuse here, Reba. We both know that art has always been political. Music has always been about more than just entertainment. Look at the folk singers of the 60s. Look at protest songs. Look at what? Reba cut him off with devastating precision. Look at artists who agreed with your political worldview. Jimmy, you don't get to decide what art should be or what music should accomplish. You don't get to lecture me about the history and purpose of country music, a genre you've probably never given a second thought to unless it served your purposes. The studio was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Even the band members who usually provided musical punctuation to the show's awkward moments seemed frozen in place. This was beyond awkward now. This was personal, and it was getting uglier by the minute. I have nothing but respect for country music, Jimmy said defensively, but his tone suggested otherwise. I've had plenty of country artists on this show. Respect? Reba laughed bitterly. Jimmy, you just spent the last 10 minutes trying to shame me for not being political enough for your taste. You've implied that I'm failing my fans, that I'm privileged, that I'm hypersensitive, and that I can't handle tough questions. If that's your idea of respect, I'd hate to see what disrespect looks like. Jimmy realized he was cornered, but instead of apologizing or trying to defuse the situation, he made one final, fatal mistake. Look, Reba, I think you're taking this way too personally. Maybe we should just agree to disagree and move on to talking about your tour dates. The condescending tone in his voice was the last straw. Reba looked at him with a mixture of disgust and disappointment that was painful to watch. Taking it too personally? She repeated, shaking her head slowly. Jimmy, you just spent 15 minutes attacking my character, my integrity, and my relationship with my fans on national television. How exactly should I be taking it? Jimmy seemed to realize he had pushed too far, but his attempt at damage control only made things worse. Reba, I'm sorry if you feel like I was attacking you. That wasn't my intention at all. I was just trying to have a meaningful conversation about important topics. Maybe we got a little heated, but that's what good television is about, right? Real conversations, real emotions. The patronizing tone in his voice was unmistakable, and Reba's expression shifted from anger to something much more dangerous, complete and utter contempt. Good television? She repeated, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying across the silent studio like a thunderclap. You think this is good television, Jimmy? You think ambushing your guests and then dismissing their legitimate concerns as being too personal is good television? I didn't ambush anyone, Jimmy protested, but his voice lacked conviction. This is how interviews work. We ask questions, we have discussions. If you don't want to engage with the topics, that's your choice, but don't blame me for doing my job. That was the moment Reba McEntire had finally heard enough. She stood up from her chair with a grace and dignity that somehow made her fury even more impressive. Your job? She said, her voice rising for the first time to match the full power of her stage presence. Your job is to entertain people, Jimmy. Your job is to make them laugh, to give them a break from their troubles, to celebrate the artists and performers who work hard to bring joy into their lives. Your job is not to lecture them, not to shame them, and certainly not to use your platform to bully guests who don't conform to your narrow worldview. Jimmy's face was now bright red. Whether from embarrassment or anger, it was impossible to tell. I'm not bullying anyone. I'm asking legitimate questions that the American people deserve answers to. The American people? Reba's voice dripped with sarcasm. Jimmy, you don't speak for the American people. You speak for a tiny fraction of coastal elites who think they know better than everyone else. You've never worked a day in your life outside of the entertainment industry. You've never struggled to make ends meet, never worried about losing your job to automation or overseas competition, never had to choose between paying for groceries or paying for medicine. But somehow you think you're qualified to lecture the rest of us about morality and responsibility. The audience was completely silent now, riveted by this display of raw emotion from one of country music's most beloved figures. Jimmy was clearly struggling to regain control of the interview, but every attempt he made only seemed to dig himself deeper into the hole. That's completely unfair, he said, his voice cracking slightly. You don't know anything about my background or my experiences, and frankly, I think you're being incredibly disrespectful to me and to this show. Reba let out a sound that might have been laughter if it hadn't been so cold. I'm being disrespectful? Jimmy, you invited me here as your guest, and then you spent the entire interview trying to make me look like a coward or a fool for not sharing your political opinions. You've been condescending, dismissive, and downright rude, and now you have the audacity to accuse me of being disrespectful? I think you need to calm down, Jimmy said, and the moment those words left his mouth, everyone in the studio knew he had just made a catastrophic error in judgment. Reba went completely still, her eyes blazing with a fire that would have made lesser mortals step back. I need to calm down? She repeated, her voice deadly quiet. Did you just tell me to calm down, Jimmy? Did you really just tell a woman who has spent her entire career dealing with men who think they know better than her to calm down? Jimmy realized his mistake immediately, but it was far too late to take it back. I didn't mean it like that. I just think we should lower the temperature here and try to have a civilized conversation." Civilized? Reba's voice rose to its full power now, filling the studio with the kind of presence that had commanded stages around the world. "There's nothing civilized about what you've done here tonight, Jimmy. You've shown complete disrespect for me, for my fans, and for the very concept of honest dialogue. You've proven that you're nothing more than a bully with a television show who thinks his platform gives him the right to attack anyone who doesn't march in lockstep with his political agenda." Jimmy was now visibly sweating, his famous composure completely shattered. "Reba, please, I think you're overreacting here. This is just a friendly debate between two people who obviously care about this country." "Friendly?" Reba shook her head in disgust. "Jimmy, there was nothing friendly about this from the moment you started your interrogation. You came into this interview with an agenda, and when I didn't give you the sound bites you wanted, you decided to try to bully and shame me into compliance. Well, congratulations. You've succeeded in showing your true colors to millions of people." She began to remove her microphone, her movements deliberate and controlled despite the obvious fury radiating from her every gesture. "You know what the real tragedy is here, Jimmy? You had a chance to have a genuine conversation with someone who has lived through 5 decades of American history, who has seen this country and this industry change in ways you can't even imagine. You could have learned something. Your audience could have learned something. Instead, you chose to turn it into a political ambush because you thought it would make for good television." "Reba, please don't do this," Jimmy pleaded, finally seeming to understand the magnitude of what was happening. "Let's just take a breath and start over. We can edit this, we can—" "Edit this?" Reba's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Oh no, Jimmy, you wanted good television? You wanted real emotions and real conversations. Well, this is what real looks like. This is what happens when you disrespect someone who has earned the right to be treated with dignity and courtesy." She placed the microphone on the chair she had been sitting in and looked directly into the camera, addressing the audience both in the studio and at home. "To the wonderful people who came here tonight expecting to see a fun interview about music and entertainment, I apologize that you had to witness this. You deserve better. You deserve hosts who celebrate artists instead of attacking them, who bring people together instead of driving them apart." Then she turned back to Jimmy, her voice carrying the full weight of her disappointment. "And as for you, Jimmy, I hope someday you learn the difference between asking tough questions and being a bully. I hope you learn that respect isn't something you can demand, it's something you have to earn. And most importantly, I hope you learn that the people watching your show aren't your political pawns. They're human beings who deserve to be treated with dignity." With that, Reba McEntire turned on her heel and walked toward the exit, her head held high and her dignity intact despite everything that had just transpired. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether to applaud or simply process what they had just witnessed. Jimmy sat behind his desk, his face a mask of shock and embarrassment, clearly at a loss for how to salvage what had become the most disastrous interview in late-night television history. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every moment of his humiliation as one of country music's greatest stars walked out of his studio and out of his show. As Reba reached the exit, she paused for just a moment and looked back over her shoulder. "Jimmy," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent studio, "next time you want to have a political debate, invite a politician. When you invite an artist, try showing some respect for what we do and why we do it." And with that, she was gone, leaving behind a studio full of stunned silence and a host whose reputation would never quite recover from the night he tried to take on the Queen of Country Music and learned exactly why she had earned that title through decades of grace, strength, and unwavering integrity. The aftermath of this explosive confrontation has continued to reverberate throughout the entertainment industry, with fans and critics alike weighing in on what many are calling one of the most dramatic moments in television history. What did you think of Reba's response?